What's going on, everybody? We are back. We got episode number 78 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, we're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 47, Hermansson versus Strickland. It's a fun card. It's a nice card to come back off the hiatus on. I think both Luke and myself have, some relatively strong opinions on this card compared to, what it looks like on paper. So I'm excited for it. As usual, we're brought to you guys by betonline.ag for 50% bonus up to your first $1,000 deposit. Use the promo code CLUBSUB. And if you like the show, guys, please drop a like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And yeah, tonight, we're not going to have Lags tonight. He had some work issues that he's dealing with. We got me, John, at MMA Fox, and Luke at SWR_betting. We will be your guides tonight to take you through this card. It's going to be fun. I'm excited to get into it. Luke, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it wasn't one I had like a ton of betting interest in pre-fight. Like to your point, I think we got a couple strong takes, nothing crazy, but a lot of fun matchups, bro.
Yeah, I completely agree. So we'll hop right into it here. We got first fight of the night. I'll throw it to you, Luke. We got Malcolm Gordon taking on Dennis Bondar. What are your thoughts?
I thought you might take this one off the top, but I guess I can start it out. I kind of like this Bondar kid. I think as a prospect, I think his wrestling's good. I think his grappling's good, but it's under the caveat that, he's not fought the greatest, strength competition. But I think like mechanically, from what I've seen, has been good from him in terms of just chain wrestling, top position, positional control. I think it's good. I think his stand-up is still a bit shaky. It's still a bit green, which is where there are some questions in the fight. But I haven't really seen much from Gordon to suggest that he can stuff takedowns here. I think he's been taken down on every single attempt, actually, in the UFC. He is kind of your bottom player, BJJ guy traditionally. I think he will accept those takedowns. Even if he doesn't, I think he'll still go down because I think Bondar's wrestling is superior personally. And honestly, I don't overtly value the grappling of Malcolm Gordon. I really just don't think it's very good. So I think it's actually a decent spot for Bondar here. Actually, where my more concern for him here is actually on the feet, just because we have seen some decent things from Gordon. I think he's reasonably fast. He's kind of athletic, but we have seen him clipped, dinged at points. I think he's been finished at like all three levels in terms of leg kicks, body kicks to the head. I get that, but there just hasn't been a ton I've seen also from Bondar at space to, feel great, at least when this fight is standing. So I think for him to justify his price tag, it comes from takedowns, wrestling pressure, potential submission. We saw Albazi kind of slice him, within 2 to 3 minutes. So I think that path is there. Am I willing to, lay over 2-1 on the kid? I think he's coming off, a year and a half, 2-year layoff to boot. Probably not. I'm just not a Malcolm Gordon guy in any stretch of the imagination. I actually think homeboy Little Fig probably would have beat him if he just stepped on the gas a bit more in that fight, but he just didn't really throw anything at all, didn't attempt a lot of takedowns either, but did actually get some top time to boot. So I think it's a decent spot for Bondar, but there are still some questions with the kid.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I'm kind of pondering a bet on Gordon, and I'll get into why in a second. I largely kind of agree with your analysis on Bondar, to be honest with you. Primarily because you're right. He does do some things mechanically well. Like technically, his double leg looks solid. On top, he does a decent job passing. He does a decent job posturing. He throws a good ground and pound. Stuff you like to see from somebody who's coming into the UFC. I guess my problem is, for one, you nailed it. Like you look at Bondar's career and like the guys he's been beating, even in this latest run up to the UFC here, are really just awful. Like there's no like Malcolm Gordon, I'd comfortably favor over all of those guys, look, Bondar is mostly handling them, with relative ease. But there have been a couple things to me that are just pretty big red flags. For one, the Kevin Jox fight. Jox is 7-4, and like he's nothing special, but he's the best fighter Bondar's fought really in the last like 4 years. And he's quite a poor grappler. He's never going to sniff the UFC, but you saw him, have his own success taking Bondar down in that fight. He got his back briefly. Bondar did eventually, get out of those positions and win that fight. But, it was hairy for moments in it. And then the only other time in his career he's really been tested is by Alexander Lunga, who is, an okay regional fighter. But, he lost that fight very cleanly, was handily outgrappled. And just for some context about Lunga, Alexander Lunga fought Luigi Buren a few months ago and was badly out-grappled by Luigi Buren, who, to be fair, is a decent grappler, but like I don't think anybody would be like, oh, Luigi Buren's potential elite grappler. So again, just to provide some context there, like Bondar, look, that fight was a long time ago, and so he's probably made improvements since then. But I don't know. I just kind of think he's definitely looked good in top position, and if he gets there here, Gordon's fairly poor in bottom position. If he gets put on bottom here, though, or Gordon can reverse position, I do think there are some like real places that Gordon can have success. I personally, it's funny. We were talking to Sean Orr earlier today, and he's like, I don't know who the fuck gave Gordon his black belt, and I'm like, I'm with him there. Gordon's grappling doesn't look great, but I've just seen stuff from Bondar, when he's had to be defensive in the grappling that I really don't like. And so, and then standing, it's like to your point, I kind of think I give Gordon a little bit of an edge standing. Like Bondar looks like he could improve into an average striker, but right now, I watch him and it's very wooden. It's fairly low volume. He's there to be clipped in the pocket. So I'd probably favor Gordon there. And so, yes, would I favor Bondar here? Yes, because I don't think Malcolm Gordon's UFC level, to be completely candid with you. But I just I can't get past this thought that it's just look at the guys Bondar's out grappling. Like if he comes into this fight and ends up getting put on his back and subs, I don't know, if that would be the most shocking thing ever. I really, for me, I could see him dominating this fight and looking aside. It's really hard for me though, with the level of competition he's fought and how he's looked a couple times. He's even fought minute steps up to put him past 55, 60%. So I'm thinking about a Gordon play. I haven't decided if I'm going to jump. Again, it's really would be more of a fade on the questions about Bondar than a bet on Gordon. But yeah, I'm not really sold on Bondar yet. I think we need to see quite a bit more from him. But moving on, we got a fun one here. We got the Vanilla Gorilla, the real Vanilla Gorilla, Jason Witt, taking on Philip Rowe. This is a fun fight. Honestly, I thought going into tape I'd bet Witt, just because I do think Witt is a pretty good wrestler, to be honest. And there were some pretty concerning things from Philip Rowe in that Orion Kosi fight. He basically let Kosi close distance with no problem at all, backed right up to the fence and hold him there. And I do think Rowe's base is narrow enough that Witt's going to hit double legs along the fence all day pretty much here. On top of which, Rowe, not really a classic counterpuncher who's going to really punish Witt's reckless entries into the pocket. But, the more I tape, it's I do think if it goes the distance, you have to favor Witt here. But I don't really think Witt is super likely to hold Rowe down for very long stretches. And I do think Witt's gas is somewhat suspect. And I think as those shots become more labored, if Rowe can start to keep it standing, look, I mean, we all know the deal with Jason Witt, right? He's pretty good when he can get off on his game, but the guy is chinny as all hell. He has no defense at all, and his striking is basically just big, wild hooks. Or in the case of the Matt Semmelsberger fight where I smashed him huge, throw a naked leg kick in the first strike of the fight and get put out cold. I mean, yeah. So it's I don't know. I look at it, and now it's down to evens, and I'm like, damn, do I want to take the jump on Phil Rowe? Probably not, but I don't know. I actually think over is an interesting bet here because it's at 1.5 and it's minus 150. And there's a good chance, like I said, that the first 7-8 minutes of this fight are going to be Witt pushing Rowe up against the fence and taking him down. I just don't trust Witt's cardio enough. And he's just not a guy that if I think he's going to get stuck in distance for any length of time, that I can trust to not get put out, So it's a pass for me for now. I think over is pretty interesting. What do you think, Luke?
Well, off the top, I don't think I've ever lost money more fast in legitimately 5 or 6 years of betting when I bet Jason Witt over Matt Semmelsberger. I legitimately think that's the fastest I've ever lost money in an MMA fight. So that sucked. But yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of the main points. I really think it's one of those potential trap by the number spot, despite I actually put up my a value prop article that Jason Witt by decision at plus 275, I think is a good poke and potentially a decent play if you are to play him. Obviously, we've seen Witt, take money on his money line, but I don't think he finishes a guy like Phil Rowe. I know Phil Rowe has been in trouble a couple of times on the feet, but I really just don't rate the overall striking of Jason Witt all that much. And, he's shown to be an okay submission grappler against bums, though. But I mean, Phil Rowe's the better grappler in the fight. I think in the scenario that Witt's having success, it's obviously that grinding, that wrestling. He's getting that top time, but I think Phil Rowe can be defensively responsible on bottom. So I think Witt decision is probably the play if you are to play Jason Witt, but it also just, to your point, kind of comes into like a trap by the number type of spot where it's like, I can see Witt like looking really, really great early on, but then he just dies. It's like, God, Jason. And it's like one of those things too. If you bet it, then you knew that going in. And if you bet it, then you're like, shit, I pitched away unit. But it's like, if he doesn't die, you're like, yes, sharp bet, like great bet.
Or if you don't bet it, and he dominates, you're like, fuck my life, right?
I know. Or if you even take the shot on Phil Rowe to KO, and then Witt gets, 7-8 minutes of top time. We see the Barb fight all over again. Witt's on skates, about to just have a heart attack or whatever. And then Rowe can't finish. It's just one of those fights I feel like I probably should just stay away from. But from a betting perspective, I do think Witt by decision actually is the play. I think he can get enough top time in this fight to potentially steal it. But man, he's just such a liability at space. It's a tough one. It's going to be a super fun fight. I think it's a great one to target on DraftKings, which I touched on with my boys earlier tonight.
So would you agree? Because it's like, I kind of feel like Rowe is as bad at keeping distance as Witt is at closing distance. Like, would you agree that earlier,
That was true, though.
Like, would you agree that like early in this fight, though, that's pretty likely to be like Witt with him against the fence, like likely landing takedowns?
Yeah, I think Witt probably wins the early part of this fight.
Yeah. So Rowe's an interesting live consideration.
Yeah,
maybe.
There's like 10,000 things you could legitimately make a case like 10,000 different ways of how you should bet this fight and why it's value. So it's like, it's one of those spots where, maybe
shouldn't bet anything.
Yeah, maybe probably should just pass. But
dude, yeah. I mean, round 3 of Barbarino Witt is one of the all-time hilarious MMA moments. Just that 5-minute sequence is outrageous.
I want to get your take on that, though. Like, I kind of think that should have been a 10-8 round, personally.
I 100% that should have been a 10-8 round.
Thank you. I feel like I'm on an island there that people are like, oh, well, because he recovered and he landed takedowns. It's like, dude, he was like significantly hurt twice, like 1 or 2 more shots and a couple more of those sequences. The guy would have been out cold. Like, that was a 10-8 round. It should have been.
That's kind of my thing, right? Witt didn't even really land strikes. Like, he almost got put out like 2 or 3 times in the round. And the guy was so fucked. That's the
definition of a 10-8 round.
He was so fucked. He bent over to grab his mouthpiece in the middle of an exchange.
Yeah,
I agree. And I had no money on it, but yeah. Anyway, this is going to be a fun fight. Maybe just enjoy it. Probably should be the people's main event that nobody's betting on, but
take your blood pressure medication if you're betting a prop, a side, whatever. It's just going to be a shit show.
Moving on, and I'll start with you here, Luke. We got Jaouani Almeida. He's making his UFC debut, coming off a fairly impressive performance on Contender Series, and he's taking on Danilo Marquez. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the sense that we just don't know much about Almeida. I think he's got like, less than 10 minutes, or so of footage on the Contender Series. I thought he showed some decent things, but some disconcerting things. Like, obviously the grinding Russian Sambo guy, got into some certain positions, but I thought he actually fared well in those positions. But in general, we just have not a ton of him at range, not a ton of him in terms of defensive grappling. He's finished all 14 of his pro fights, so we've never seen him necessarily overtly extended, hit the cards, win a fight on the cards. And that's, a common theme that I like to talk about in terms of just general betting. Can somebody win minutes, especially when it's, spotty on the regionals? It's hard to say when they, when they generally haven't. But actually, I do think a decent look on the fight, and I actually did take a little pop on it today, was Almeida by KO. At plus 300. I still just think that Marquez is a massive liability at space personally. Even secondarily, I kind of heard in an interview today after the fact, even before my analysis, this guy kind of understands the the Marquez game plan, what his strong suit is, what he's going to try to do. It sounds like the dude's going to just try to stand, box him up. He's not going to be out here shooting takedowns, wrestling. That could obviously change. You never know. Don't like to look into interviews too much, but I just think the length difference, the speed difference, the athleticism difference, I think he puts this guy out. And I think it's just because that the guy's finished, I think, 9 of his 14 pro wins via sub. That's kind of the automatic conclusion. That's why you're seeing that sub line around evens. The KO, it hasn't happened as often. You're seeing it plus 300, but as touched on, I just think Marquez is a general liability at space. So if I was to play the fight, that's how I was to play it. But what I will say at the same time, even in taking a pop on that, that's a plus 300 and not laying the minus 400 money line or putting him in a parlay because we still don't know a ton about the guy. And what I will say for Marquez is I've been categorically wrong on him in a lot of capacities. He's significantly outperformed his price tag. He was a decent sized dog to Mike Rodriguez. He was a dog to our homeboy Cadiz. We bet Cadiz death gassed when nothing really happened. It was probably one of the most funny things I've ever seen in my life. He was just dead after 2 to 3 minutes. There wasn't a ton of wrestling, ton of striking, and he just died anyway. But that was interesting. Even against our boy Kennedy, he was winning, the first, I would say, half of that fight. Obviously in pursuing the backpacks and the grappling, he gassed and then got finished. But to just the guy's credit, he has outperformed my general expectations of what I thought he would do in the UFC. He's consistent to wrestle, consistent to grapple. And as noted, we just haven't seen this Almeida guy really extended, overtly tested. What is his overt defensive grappling like? We don't know. What's his overt gas tank like? We don't know. So it's just kind of just general base sports betting MMA principle. You can't be laying minus 400 on that type of scenario. So I do think, Marquez is live in some capacity, just based on the fact that we don't know much about Almeida. The guy could be the goods or he could be a complete fraud at the same time. We really just don't know. So my general take is I'd rather just stay away from it from a money line. Like I said, I'm taking the KO because I just don't like Marquez at space at all. And I think that's what we're going to see here.
Yeah, I'm not much of a Marquez guy either. Honestly, like if it wasn't for me ass pulling the Kennedy fight, like it would have just been a complete bonfire of money for me in the UFC. So I mean, I think I had an obscene amount of money on Cadiz Ibrahimov against Marquez, knowing that Cadiz had gas tank issues. But to your point, I mean, Marquez has largely outperformed his regional tape. Like regionally, he didn't really look like much of a wrestler. He looked like not much of a striker. He didn't look like he did anything particularly well. Since he's gotten to the UFC, though, honestly, his game is ugly and he can be gassy, but he has a game that works for the light heavyweight division. He has a really good single leg. He seems to be really strong, and he's very good at sweeping the leg of his opponents underneath it. And he has an excellent back take. And so, at light heavyweight, where almost no one can grapple, that's really a game that can work against a lot of guys. And so you look at this fight though, and like Almeida, I guess he's a BJJ guy. That seems to be, Luke touched on it. 9 of his 14 victories are by submission. There's not a whole lot of data of him doing much else, but also there's just not a whole lot of data on Almeida in general. That's, I think, when I was reviewing this fight, one of the most frustrating things for me, because the only real live body he's fought outside of contenders was Bruno Aziz, and that was in 2018, I think. And that's the only fight he went to a decision on, and he lost that fight. But I can't find that fight. I have no idea. I have not seen that fight. So it's like, that's pretty frustrating because I don't really know what happened. The rest of the guys he fought in Brazil, really, I mean, he's fought 5 or 6 guys who either didn't have a fight or 0-1 or 0-2, the classic, Brazilian can squasher. And I'll give him some credit. He looked reasonably good. I agree with you, Luke. I think he's an excellent athlete. He probably hits pretty hard. He looks like he's on all the juice, to be honest. I don't know. He's an intriguing prospect, I guess. But I also kind of think, we saw Nasruddinov get him down twice. We saw his cardio. We don't know what his cardio looks like, to be honest with you, which is kind of, a huge question for a guy that's that muscle strapped. We don't really know what his striking is like. And so it's like he seems like an interesting prospect because he's athletic and he grapples, but I don't know. Like I look at this line, and I'm just like, I saw Nazardinov taken down. I know Marquez has a pretty good single, and I know Marquez is pretty strong. Maybe it turns out Almeida is actually an excellent striker, and he can keep space and jab, and move off the line and just not get cornered on the fence. But if not, and if he just backs straight up, he's probably going to end up on the mat here. And on bottom, we don't really know. It's kind of one of those things where it's like jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu, especially if one, and I'm inclined to think Marquez is the better wrestler, though I could be wrong about that too. But like jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu, whoever is the better one is probably going to look dominant in that kind of a fight. And we don't really know. Marquez looks like he's got pretty good jiu-jitsu. So does Almeida. The problem is, though, like you touched on, Luke, Marquez is a liability in space. He's very open to the body. He does gas if he's forced to grapple for an extended period of time. And so, like, I look at it, it's like, I think Almeida, his upside could be pretty high if he passes all of these tests. But, like, it's something like the range of potential outcomes on this fight is something like Marquez minus 150 all the way down to, like, Almeida minus 500. Like, I don't really see a scenario where Marquez is past minus 150 just because of his own fundamental flaws. Whereas I can see scenarios where Almeida is just like, oh, this guy wins this fight 9 out of 10 times,
This is like a prototypical John Bet spot.
It is. I hate Danilo Marquez, dude. When they find the fire of 1,000 suns. Like, I bet fucking Kennedy against him. That should tell you everything you need to know. But I am thinking about betting him, to be honest, because I do think, like, what does the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy do on his back usually? Play guard. And I do think Marquez is going to be the one who's more proactive about shooting takedowns. So I don't know. I think it's worth a poke. I'm probably going to poke Marquez, to be completely honest. Makes me a little nauseous. But either way, we're going to get Brazilian on Brazilian crime here, and I'm pretty excited for it. So moving on, Luke, I'll throw it back to you. I think you have a bet here. We got Alexis Davis taking on Julija Stoliorenko.
Yeah, I love me some Davis in this spot. I really don't think there's much to unpack here. I think it's really just a levels fight. It's another scenario where I think obviously she's favored moderately, and that makes sense. But why she's not favored higher is the fact that she's 37. She gets hit in the face a lot. I get it, but there's just like so much context associated with the matchup. I mean, the girls out here having competitive minutes with, top 15 level strikers and even taking rounds off of them. I think there's an argument that you can even say that Davis beat Panny, in the last fight, depending on your perception of it. I don't think it personally, but I think it, it was competitive nonetheless. My point is that I think this is probably Davis's easiest fight she's had almost in her entire UFC run. If I'm being completely honest, in terms of a level of competition, Stoliorenko, there's just an argument that Stoliorenko is not a UFC caliber fighter at all. She's a girl who struggles with effective pressure. She fights in bursts. She's extremely hittable. She's more of your guard sub armbar type of darling on the regional scene, beating a bunch of cans. But I mean, it wasn't that long ago she's out there going and, getting outstruck by Leah Letson at distance at all either. So we know Alexis Davis is consistent to come forward, push a pace. Obviously, the girl gets hit a lot, but she's actually a pretty decent boxer. She's mixed in her kicks too. Like I said, she's having competitive minutes with top 15 girls, even in these fights that she's losing. She's going damn near evens at distance with these girls too. She's just losing primarily on optics and effective striking. But that's just nothing that Stoliorenko has shown to be able to do, even over regional level competition. So I don't see many scenarios of how she outboxes Davis. Davis does only stuff takedowns at 28% or so, but even in the scenarios that Davis has been taken down in some of those fights, she's actually been able to sweep, win, do good things in those fights. This is also the first black belt that Stoliorenko has fought. We also haven't seen Stoliorenko, proactively be shooting takedowns at all. I think one takedown from Alexis Davis is a round here. So she's either going to have to just get, blood and guts war with Davis, squeak something that way, even though she's going backwards. She's going to have to sub Davis for the, the first time in, I think, about 8 years. I think Rousey was the last girl to do it. So ultimately, if Alexis Davis can't beat this girl, it's probably time to go ahead and hang up the gloves.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100% here. It's really hard. Like the best case scenario for Stoliorenko here is likely a close decision win. And to be honest, I know the Stoliorenko Avila fight was competitive-ish because there were some fun exchanges, but it really wasn't that competitive. And like personally, I would price Alexis Davis at like minus 150 against Julia Avila, and Avila was minus 400 against Stoliorenko. But to your point, Davis is 37, and she's like what 1-5 in her last 6, something like that. But again, you touched on it. I don't need to break down the technical aspects of it any more than you did. But like, look, the bottom line is Davis has been having competitive fights with Chikagian, Jennifer Maia, Viviane Araujo, beat the shit out of Sabina Mazo. She should win this fight however she wants. I'm very confident she's not going to get armbarred, to be honest with you. I actually think if Davis gets on top of her, she's going to just smash her from top position or submit. I think Davis.
Hot take. I think Davis might finish her, to be honest.
I think Davis is way more live to submit Stoliorenko than the other way around, to be completely honest with you. Yeah, I don't want to say I don't see a lot of it. Look, it's WMMA, and if they stand, it's going to be a high-paced striking match. But like Davis has a reliable pace and Stoliorenko doesn't. Even if you watch the Avila fight, Stoliorenko landed some hard shots in that fight, but she doesn't really follow anything up with it. It's like a lot of ones, two. There's no combinations being thrown. We just watched Alexis Davis land 125 significant strikes against Penny Kianzad. That was a very close fight. I bet her in that fight. I agree with you. I thought she lost as well. Though when I heard 30-27, I was certain she won. But they were reading the scorecards out. But the bottom line is like every one of those girls she fought on that run would be being lined in the minus 400 range here, except Alexis Davis, who is someone who's fought for a title and fought nothing but top 8 girls for the last decade. So yeah, I don't think this makes any sense at all. I think Davis should handle her however she wants here. Moving on, we got Marc-Andre Barriault, everyone's favorite Canadian, taking on Chidi Njokuani, most famous for being Anthony Njokuani's brother. Look, I bet Barriault here. I bet Chidi on Contenders as an underdog. Look, he does some okay stuff. If you give Chidi the space he needs to operate, he's a very good kickboxer. If Barriault just stays in space here, he'll get picked apart, no doubt about it. And, if you're a really bad grappler and Chidi can get on top of you, he can look pretty good there as well. The problem for Chidi, and it's been his entire career if you go through Bellator, when he gets pressure, he just backs right up. And it's just literally, I was saying to somebody today, it's just like, look, Barriault's going to be having press to the fence in 30 seconds here. Like he doesn't really have cage work. You're not going to see him jab and step off the center line. It's going to be right back. And he's not bad in the clinch. He's okay there. He's got decent knees, but we've seen him get bullied there before. Koreshkov, not classically a huge clinch fighter, bullied him in there. What? Carvalho, yeah. I mean, and Carvalho since this new breed of Bellator guys has come in there, has been basically non-competitive with all of them.
He sucks now. He's horrible now.
Dude, and he dominated Chidi in that fight. Literally dominated him. And I guess, that's my view on Chidi, is that he's going to have some success in the UFC if they stick someone in front of him who's going to stand back at distance and kickbox with him. He'll be pretty good there. But he's very easy to get to the fence. He's very easy to grapple. And I have this feeling with him that he's a bit soft, to be honest. He doesn't really like being bullied. Anytime guys have really tried to physically bully him, he's looked really uncomfortable. Not that he's overtly quitting or looking for a way out, but you see his volume drop off a cliff and he just kind of starts to accept the position. And then on the other side, you have Barriault. And look, the case, we all know what Barriault is, right? He's an average striker who has average athleticism, who is an A durability and has A+ cardio, and will just continue to come forward all fight. The bottom line is for Barriault, if you stick a guy against Barriault who is better than him in the clinch, or a guy like Jun Young Park who can just jab and move, he's pretty fucked because he doesn't have a lot of options there. He doesn't cut the cage off particularly well, and he just relies really on that pressure and clinch game, and on his gas tank. But I don't think he's getting that here. Like I said, Chidi's got good knees, but I think when he gets put on the fence here, he's going to get absolutely mauled by Barriault. I think Barriault's got a much more reliable gas tank, and his style is so exhausting. To your point, Carvalho destroyed him in that fight. He's going to get all of that and more from Barriault. Maybe Chidi has made improvements that weren't present in the last 10 years in his fighting career, but I'm inclined to think not. I really think unless Chidi can do something to knock him out here, I don't want to say he doesn't have a way to win, but I think it's going to be pretty tough for him to win this fight. Barriault is going to go forward. He's going to pressure him. Even if Chidi lands a takedown or two, Barriault's almost impossible to hold down. We saw Park get 5 takedowns. We saw Sanchez get 5 takedowns against him. Neither one was able to hold him down pretty much at all. I don't think Chidi's going to be able to. I think Barriault should be a moderate favorite, to be honest. Like minus 185, minus 150, minus 185. Look, he's not the most skilled guy in the world, so it's always live that maybe Chidi can just outskill him. But I just don't think so. I think Barriault's a pretty classic top 20 to 25 middleweight. He's going to have an athletic and skill ceiling that he can't break through. But guys below that who he can get his game off against, he's going to beat. And I think Chidi is exactly that mold. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of the main points for me, so I don't want to rehash everything you said, but I think an interesting component is that Park fight, because I think that's something that people will reference, like, okay, that Barriault struggled with the outside game of Park, but it's like Park was on his bike for 15 minutes in that fight, and Park threw over 200 strikes in that fight to boot, where it's like Chidi, he's just not high output. He needs that more methodical outside technical kickboxing based game to succeed. And that's just not something that Barriault has really given to anybody. So it's like, I think he's really a decent archetype to go out there and beat kind of the technical, slower paced kickboxer type. He's going to make it greedy. He's going to make it grindy. To your point, he's durable. He's got 15 minutes of cardio. If he is taken down, he's tough to hold down. If anything, he's gotten stuck on the cage, but he's getting stuck on the cage against guys like Andrew Sanchez, who we know is a pretty solid MMA-based wrestler. Even Park, pretty underrated MMA wrestler, in my opinion. So I never really understood the Chidi steam that came this week. I actually jumped in on Barriault at minus 110. Personally, we've seen him get some buyback, but I think him, 60, 65%. That's probably about right. Now, to your point, if he gets stuck, in a pitter patter outside range striking affair, he's going to lose that fight. But we were kind of talking about it even before I think they dropped a line for it. It's like, when has Barriault been just content to stand outside and get picked apart by anybody? Like, that's not what, like, maybe he just like rushes the pocket or something, eats a knee, eats an elbow or something. He goes down like that. Like, I get it. But, well, then Chidi would also be the first guy to put him out in 24 fights between pro and Ami too. So, I mean, props to Chidi there. But that's just not his game. He's going to make it greasy, gritty, and grindy. And that's just something I like from a guy who's going to try to fight more technical, who has more athletic advantage, who has more speed advantage. It's like, well, he's not going to necessarily give that to him. If he does, then yeah, he's going to lose. But it's like, Pick'em doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
What do you think about Tim's question? Do you think it goes the distance?
It's hard to say, because I think from a boxing perspective, I think Barriault's going to apply more pressure even than he ever has before. Obviously he's struggled with, in regards to Chidi, he struggled with some of that pressure before. I think Koreshkov clipped him and put him down. So I think it's possible. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if it goes the distance or not. I'd probably lean that way just because Barriault's not like a big overt power threat, but I don't necessarily know how he's going to deal with that type of pressure from a guy like Barriault. So I think Barriault is live to finish 2 or 3 maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing as well. Like, I sort of think a Barriault finish has to probably, like, I doubt he's going to submit Chidi, even if he got on top of him.
It's probably like attritional.
Or Chidi's kind of like gassing out and wanting out of there,
Yeah.
I agree. So, like, I'm inclined to think, I actually think the over's not bad here. But, I mean, do I want to play a juiced over or play Barriault near evens? I mean, for me, that's a pretty obvious answer. Moving on, though, we got another. This is a really fun fight. It's kind of weird. This is buried on the prelims, but we got Hakeem Dawodu taking on Mike Tresano. It's on the prelims, and Soriano Maximov is the co-main. Very, very, very strange placement. Luke, you want to take this one away?
Yeah, this is one of the ones I probably don't have, like, I shouldn't say a great read on, but just no passionate take on. Obviously, both guys don't really wrestle much. I think Tresano is like an okay submission grappler. Once again, he doesn't wrestle much. Dawodu, I think, has pretty good takedown defense overall. I know that's gotten broken a little bit, but obviously by tough Russian wrestler Evloev type of character. So I don't think there's much transparency there. I think Dawodu being, a slight favorite makes sense primarily for the reasons I just favor his output a bit more. I think he's a bit better defensively. I think he's a bit better of an athlete. So I don't think there's much in depth here for me. I think about 60% for Dawodu is about fair. But the thing with Dawodu is that he has fought close before as a result. He's not necessarily this big power puncher. And I do think Tresano actually is a guy who's a bit underrated. I think we both cashed on Tresano over Klein. I know people are going to pull out their Simpsons gifts and pitchforks. Like, fuck you. You shouldn't have won that fight. You guys shouldn't have won that fight or whatever. But I do think the guy's a bit underrated. I just think he's going to be a tad one step behind Dawodu here. So yeah, it's just a massive pass for me. I think we just kind of get pitter patter striking exchange. Dawodu's a bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It's weird because I'm lowishly high on Dawodu, if that makes any sense. Like, I respect what he can do. He's a skilled striker. He has a very diverse arsenal of striking attacks. He's decent in the clinch, but he's not a very good grappler. And to your point, he's very low. Like, he's been to split decision 4 times in the UFC with guys who are inferior strikers to him. And it's like, I don't really care whether it should have been a split or not. The fact that he's going to split this often means that he is fighting very, very close consistently, and he's just not doing enough.
And what I think it's honestly not necessarily his volume. I think it's just optics. Yeah. I think optics are a big thing as to why he's going to split. But
so accept the back foot too, and he's not really hurting people. He's not a guy that he's not snapping guys' heads back when he throws, and so it's very hard for me to. It's funny because when I saw the lines first came out, he was minus 140. I was like, oh, Dawodu could be interesting. And then you watch, just oh God, this is a guy who could give up 1 3 or 4 punch combination at the end of a round and just lose a round because of it. That he looked to control pretty much. It's I can't get behind that guy because I don't think he has much finishing upside, and he has no real grappling path to victory. But on the other side, that he touched on with Tresano, I like Tresano. I think he's a nice mid-tier UFC featherweight. He's a decent boxer. He's got decent low kicks. He's a decent grappler for the division. He's going to stay competitive in a lot of striking fights. He's going to stay competitive in a lot of fights. But, he doesn't really have almost any diversity to his attacks. He can take a long time to build into fights. You look at the Klein fight, he won that. But, if he had just come out from the bell, throwing like he was late in the fight, he cruises in that fight, especially we know of Klein. But that's kind of been his MO his whole career. He's a very, very slow starter. I think he lost round 1 to Joe Giannetti, if I'm not mistaken, which that hasn't aged very well. But, and so it's I do think Tresano theoretically could win this fight. I kind of just come down on the line's probably right. It probably is a very close fight a lot of the time. But a close fight that Dawodu wins a lot of the time, if that makes sense, where he just, his attacks are a bit more impactful. He gets hit a bit less. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm expecting it to be a close fight. I don't really have any interest in betting Dawodu, and I just don't. If I'm betting against Dawodu, I want someone who can either wrestle or is going to push a pace. And Tresano's not going to really do either of those things. So it's a pass for me. Moving on, we got Miles Johns taking on John Castaneda. This is kind of an interesting one. I've seen a lot of Castaneda love this week. I'm kind of there and I'm not there. I've been waffling hard whether or not I want to take the poke. The thing is for me with Miles Johns is, I don't want to call him a fraud. I think he is largely overrated, and I think the books overrate him. But I do think he is good at what he does. It's another guy, if you let him have his game, he's going to be quite good, which is basically sit back, jab, kick, move, occasionally wrestle, and that's kind of it. And thus far, he's had a lot of fights with guys that let him have that game. The only guy that did it was Mario Batista. Obviously, that finish was kind of random with the flying knee that he knocked him out with. But, Johns, if he can just stay in jabbing range and just get off on his shots in a low volume affair, he's going to look pretty good. He does a good job limiting exchanges coming back at him, and he actually measures distance reasonably well. What I don't like from Johns is just generally, I don't trust his cardio, and I don't really like when he gets pressured, how, he reacts to shots and the way he just tends to shell up on the fence. On top of which, I've seen some tendencies, when he's fought southpaws or guys have swapped the southpaw on him that I just really don't like. He basically stops throwing the jab entirely, which, look, a jab for a mediocre striker isn't easy to land on a southpaw if you're orthodox, but he basically just kind of resorts to spamming overhands. He doesn't throw kicks. He doesn't really set anything up. He just kind of looks lost. And so, like, I have this feeling that one of these days, Johns is going to fight a decent southpaw who basically just wins the foot position battle consistently and lights him up. John Castaneda is a southpaw, but is he the southpaw that's going to do that? You know, I think the level of decentness that John Castaneda is pretty questionable here. You know, I've seen some takes that Castaneda might wrestle him. I really don't think that's happening. I really would be pretty surprised if Castaneda, if anybody has wrestling success here, I think it's going to be Johns personally. And again, like I said, I think Castaneda could, in theory, have some success on the feet, but I don't think he has very good footwork, and I don't think Castaneda's boxing is very good. I think he could keep it close, you know, maybe out busy Johns. I think that's in play. I expect this, unless Johns finishes him, or the other way around, Castaneda finishes him, to be a fairly close fight if it goes the distance. But again, kind of similar to last fight, I sort of think it's a close fight that Johns wins, you know, in a fairly high clip. I just think he's a much better athlete. I think even though I don't rate him particularly high, I think he has more effective tools for this level. Like, I don't think Castaneda has many effective tools for this level. And that's kind of, you know, the problem for me. I think he can make it a close fight. Do I want to bet him? I don't really know. What do you think? Any read here?
It's weird for me because I don't really rate Castaneda. Actually came very close to betting Eddie Wineland in the last fight, to be completely honest. But honestly, my read in that fight was pretty much spot on, in the sense that I thought it was going to be competitive until Eddie Wineland died, because he was 37 years old. And that's what happened. I classify Castaneda as like I think he's just kind of serviceable. I don't think he does anything overtly well between striking, wrestling, or grappling. I don't think his pace is anything special. I don't think his wrestling is anything special. It's also like hard to understand too, with the context of, you know, him fighting over in Combate. It's just a promotion.
So
you know,
bad.
I just don't value it. I mean, Humberto Bondar and I was fighting for a title not that long ago, you know, in Combate. To just put that in
against Rafa Garcia, I think.
Yeah, I think that was the title. It was Bananai versus Garcia. So there's some context there of what the Combate promotion is. So it's like, but to your point, it's like Johns kind of does play the back foot, but he doesn't get hit a lot. I just think whether Castaneda, like, I wouldn't want to say justifies value, but can potentially justify value. Like, he just has to do things. He just has to be active. He has to try to throw a lot of strikes. He has to go forward. He has to attempt takedowns. Whether he has a ton of success or not on the takedowns, I don't know. It still just is kind of concerning for Johns in those scenarios that when people have shot on him, you know, the Canadian homeboy and Richie Santiago back on the Contender Series, you know, he's gotten tired in those fights where people are proactively grappling him. Now, once again, I don't think Castaneda's wrestling is anything special. I just think for him to justify his price tag, or I mean, I think it's just pretty much been one-way traffic on Castaneda. Everyone's coming in on him this week.
Is the line moving?
He's down to +163.
Wow.
I mean, I think
I'm definitely not betting him there. I didn't even know that. I thought he was still over +200. I will not be betting him there.
Yeah, I think he started up, you know, +220, +230. Yeah. My issue with, like, I don't hate anybody betting Castaneda, but the reason why I'm not betting him is, one, because I don't trust his activity striking, and I don't trust his activity wrestling. I just don't. Would I be happy to bet Miles Johns at chalk? Not really. But once again, you're just banking on the guy to also do things, but it's hard to also translate it to the certain style matchup at all. Like, to your point, John, if someone's having wrestling success here, do you really think that Castaneda can have extended wrestling success on Miles Johns? I don't think so either, right? Miles Johns.
I think Johns is a much better wrestler, personally.
Yeah, and he does defend. Well, even to Miles Johns' credit, you know, he did beat Adrian Yanez. You know, he didn't get a ton of takedown success there, but he got a ton of cage push or whatever. And that wasn't that long. Well, I guess it was probably like 4 or 5 years ago now. But nonetheless, it's like, I think it would be smart for him to mix in takedowns, in the sense to, like, just make the guy work, make him tired. I don't think he has a ton of success there, but that's my thing. If Castaneda is to win the fight, it's based on just general activity. Do things, attempt takedowns, throw strikes, make the guy work. Don't give Miles Johns a pretty type of fight. And then I think he could be live in that scenario, but I still think it's hard to say that he's going to do that.
So that's my question, though. It's like, what does that scenario look like, though? Because he's not. I'd rather have somebody who is defensively void and going to go forward and just spam shit at Johns than John Castaneda, to be honest. You know?
That's what I'm saying. It's hard to bank on.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I got to tell you, it's starting to remind me a bit of the Kevin and Tivinon fight, where it's like I taped it when Johns was like minus 230, and I'm like, I can't bet this. The line's probably right. I don't understand the Tivinon money. And then it got down to like minus 140, and I was just like, well, now I have no choice but to bet this. Like, if it goes below Johns minus 150, I'll probably just do the same thing and just be like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, I have to bet Miles Johns, you know? So I don't want to make that choice, though.
Yeah, I fuck the fight.
Anyway, we move on. We got a good one here. We got Julian Arosa. He's taking on Steven Ocho Peterson, best nickname in MMA. This is a pretty fun fight. Obviously Arosa coming off one of, if not the biggest wins of his career against Charles Jourdain. Line is a minus 300 favorite. You don't really see Julian Arosa minus 300 very often. What do you think, Luke?
Well, I think he's only actually been a favorite once in the UFC, to be completely honest. So that would prove your point as well. It's just weird based on the style dynamic. Obviously, the guy's crazy hittable. He can be taken down. But I think the line in some sense does make sense because it's one of his more winnable fights. And I think that's one thing you have to give credit to Arosa for, that he's just fought a tough strength of schedule over the years. But I've also said at the same time, Arosa is one of those guys you want to back as an undervalued dog who's just going to kind of fight for your money, throw shit out the window. He has power. He's got those long arms, those front headlock series, the darts, anaconda chokes. Are you trying to back him at 3-1? Probably not, especially like, I don't think Peterson is a UFC caliber fighter. I actually bet him at chalk against Hooper because I thought it was a bad matchup for Hooper personally, but he is a tough guy to finish. You know, he blocks punches with his face, but he is a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He's tough to submit. He's most likely going to be in there for all 3 rounds. So it's like, at the same time, it's kind of hard to get there with Arosa at minus 300, just given some of the historics. It's another one of those kind of really funky matchups on the card. Am I willing to back Peterson? No, because I think he's just kind of your meat and potatoes guy. I don't think he's fast. He's not athletic. Said he's hittable. I don't think his offensive wrestling is anything special. Like, he's just, I kind of think Arosa just tees off on him, to be honest. And Arosa, I'm sorry, not Arosa, but Peterson kind of just follows him around for 15 minutes. And he just kind of paw shots his way to a decision. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, like, if you were to design a fighter in a lab that I was looking to bet against Arosa as an underdog, it would be someone that is durable, throws a lot of punches, and attempts a lot of takedowns. And Peterson checks all those boxes, but also, to your point, he's not really UFC level. You know, the guy's defense is it's what I imagine yours or my defense would look like if we were striking with people in the UFC.
At least I would be Imanari rolling. I'd be limiting damage.
Peterson made me believe that Luis Pena had promise as a striker. Like that's and so it's like the guy. He does some things that I think could, in theory, trouble Arosa. Like, look, obviously, I'm not even really sure that Arosa has a durability issue so much as he has I fight with my hands down and my chin straight up in the air at all time issue, you know? But he does do that. And, like, Peterson, like, could he catch Arosa? I mean, he knocked out Martin Bravo with a spinning back fist, you know? Could he win a decision? And I'm like, I don't really know, because there's almost like 2 data points that are to some degree similar fights, and they're almost conflicting in a way. You have his fight with Alex Caceres, which was a very close fight, actually. A fight that should not have been a close fight. Like, how Alex Caceres was in a close fight with Steven Peterson, I'll never know. But he was. I think it was a split decision, if I'm not mistaken. But then you have the Luis Pena fight. Granted, Pena came in like 5 pounds overweight, But, you have the Luis Pena fight where, from what we've seen from Luis Pena since, that Peterson lost that fight as one-sidedly as he did is a pretty bad sign. And I both think they are, obviously Caceres is the much better fighter than Pena, but I think they're the two closest comps you can find to Arosa here. And I think Arosa, he's certainly better than Pena, and he's more dangerous than Caceres is. I think kind of skew it's going to look more like the Pena fight. Like Rosa can scramble okay. He's probably the better submission grappler here. I seriously doubt that Peterson can get him down on the mat and hold him there. Like I think he can get takedowns. If Peterson gets 3 or 4 takedowns here, I won't be shocked. But like you saw, I mean, Hooper is kind of like wild and like really scrambly, but my feeling on Hooper is he's pretty easy to control if you have a good top game, and he was able to put, Peterson in some really uncomfortable situations. And so to me, it's kind of just like, I don't want to say Peterson can't win a decision. Like I said, he was in a very close fight with Alex Caceres, but I think Arosa is a much more consistent fighter than Caceres is. Peterson could knock Arosa out. He could. That's in play. But it's like, what percentage of the time is he like winning a decision plus knocking him out? Is it much higher than 25%? I don't.
I mean, even Arosa who went like strike for strike with Jourdain. You can say what you want about Jourdain, but Jourdain can crack, bro. Like
he can, yeah. You know what I think is a little interesting here? Under 2.5 is plus 110, and like I get it. Peterson's like historically been durable, but I do think Arosa is probably more dangerous than any of the guys that Peterson's fought on the feet in the UFC.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah. And on top of which, Arosa is a pretty dangerous finishing threat. And combine that with the fact that Arosa's got a bad chin and these guys are going to throw a million strikes. Under a plus number, I kind of think it should be favorite money personally. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, it's a weird fight. I guess from the under perspective, it's like how much do you bank on the historic durability of Peterson, but also based on the style dynamic, to your point, because of how dangerous Arosa is historically offensively, more so than past opponents who's just going to say, fuck it. I'm going to throw. And if you go down, I'm going to attack the Dars. I'm going to attack the Anaconda. I'll fucking go Peru on you. Like he doesn't like, it's just going to be like one of those high action fights, but it could also be like a high action under trap too. So it's interesting, but yeah, you might have some there where that looks like fucking minus 200, dude.
Yeah, I can't, like, because Luis Pena has pillow fists, right? Like this is like Julian Arosa it's a lot harder than Luis Pena or Alex Caceres does.
Violent Bob ain't so violent no more.
Well, outside the cage, he's a little violent.
Inside the
cage. Anyway, moving on. Woo! I think we got me and Luke's main event of the evening here. We got Bryan Battle coming off of winning the Ultimate Fighter. He's taking on MMA Twitter's darling this week, Tresano Gore. I am not on the MMA Twitter side of this fight. I like Bryan Battle here, to be honest. I'll be honest. It's kind of funny because I didn't watch the Ultimate Fighter this season. I watched it for years, but it's kind of like got a little sick of it. I've obviously watched the fights back since, but I was expecting to really like Gore because all I heard and all I saw, on Twitter and everything was that Tresano Gore was the best fighter on the season by far. And if he hadn't gotten hurt, he would have clearly won. And then I watched Gore's tape and I was like, it was almost like 3 fights in a row. And I was just like, I'm still waiting to see this thing that everybody else sees about Tresano Gore here. And like, all I really see is a guy that hits fairly hard and throws a lot of good leg kicks. And that's really it. He's fairly low volume. And even the degree to which he hits hard, I'm not saying he's not a big hitter. I'm sure he has power. But like, I don't think we're talking about one of the biggest hitters in middleweight history by any means here. But he's low volume. His leg kicks are probably the best part of his game. As a grappler, it's kind of an unknown, but I really didn't love how he looked. He only had a couple grappling exchanges regionally, but I thought he was pretty loose when he was on top, and I thought on bottom he looked fairly suspect. And cardio, we don't really know. He hasn't really gone very deep into fights. What we do know is he only has 3 professional fights outside of the Ultimate Fighter. In the Ultimate Fighter, he fought Ryan Newman, who basically just decided not to fight that day. and just let him throw strikes to him like crazy. And Gilbert Urbina, who ran into the same right hand 3 times in a row and was finished that way. Again, I don't really think there's much data you can take from that, but we do have data of him going to a split with a guy named Prince Ellerby, who at the time was 0-0 and now is 0-3. He went to a split with Robert Hale, who's, decent regional fighter, but nothing special. He hasn't, LJ Davis was a fight, the one fight we saw him grapple in, and it looked like Davis was taking over the fight late in the first round, and then Davis got off at the end of the round, his knee blew out. It's really, it's very, very strange. He hasn't really, in my opinion, looked very good. There's nothing really about Gore's game other than the power optics are nice that makes me think he's even remotely a UFC caliber fighter. And on the other side, you have Brian Battle, who, look, Battle's got plenty of fucking flaws, man. He's defensively got issues. He obviously, hasn't been around that much either. He looked bad in the Petrosky fight, but Andre Petrosky's a pretty good wrestler. But, what Battle does have, and despite the fact that he seems to be pretty defensively void in the pocket, he's got a motor. He throws a ton of strikes. He's kind of big. He's long. And he's a decent grappler, honestly. Like Petrosky, kept getting him down, but he was able to scramble back up, and that's why Petrosky gassed out in that fight. We've seen him do that regionally other times. When I look at these two guys, it's like I don't think either is going to be good in the UFC, but volume, durability, and submission grappling are tools that translate pretty well at the UFC level to 185 pounds. Whereas I don't really see a lot that Gore does that translates very well to the UFC, other than the leg kicks, really. And even those, he seems to throw them a bit higher than the calf. Like he doesn't really seem to be disabling legs with them. And on top of which, actually, it's kind of interesting. Battle's obviously got more pro fights. I think 2x the amount of pro fights as Gore. But as an amateur, Battle fought Impa Kasanganay and beat him. He fought Cody Brundage and beat him. He fought Billy Alicana, who he lost the split to, who was going to be a pro fighter that people know about one day. I think Battle's way more proven. I think on minutes here, he's going to cruise on minutes. I think if it goes to the grappling, he is a significantly better grappler. I just think the big concern here is maybe his leg gets disabled or he gets knocked out because he has defensive issues. But I don't understand how Battle could possibly be an underdog here. So I'm betting him. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I'm right there with you as well on Battle. I actually bet him in the fight against Urbina as well. I know the start was a bit rocky or whatever, but we've also seen, to your point, guys got some rockier starts, and that's kind of probably what the concern here in this fight is against Gore. Fast, explosive type of guy, probably the better athlete, a bit faster, has more power. He got the leg kick consideration too. But there's just so many things that suggest as to why Gore shouldn't be a favorite in terms of general question marks. Battle, to your point, long. He's going to throw a ton of strikes. Despite him getting taken down, he's shown immense defensive responsibility on the ground. His ability to work out of positions, transition. He's submitted 2 brown belts now as well. I think that's important to note. His cardio is proven. His durability is proven. He's shown he can handle adversity in a couple fights where we have not seen that from Tresano Gore at all. Tresano Gore is a guy who's been largely given these tepid, outside base fights, and he's looked good in them, and props to him. I can't take anything away from the guy, but what I can say definitively, for better or for worse, Brian Battle is going to test this guy exponentially more than any past opponent has. So maybe that gets him nuked. Maybe that gets him killed. Maybe Gore is the real deal. But once again, it's also in relation to the price tag. It's like, how is the guy, minus 160? It doesn't really make any sense to me, especially I think probably the first round is the best round for Gore, but I don't think that's also like an automatic thing that Gore just wins round 1 at all. I think he's facing a skill set in Battle who is pretty well-rounded. Once again, good cardio, good durability, who's not going to go out easy, not going to go out soft, who's going to test the guy more than he ever has in his entire career. I think the line's more of a product of that, to your point, when everybody came into the show, Gore's the hardcore darling. People loved him. People thought he was going to take the show, whatever. The dude blew his knee. Didn't happen. Battle won the quasi title or whatever. And now we're getting it for the real, tough 28 championship, and everybody is still in love with them. But he's just been given the fights he needs to succeed. So I don't get it. It's like, I'm fine to play into the potential variance here because I think Battle just has a game that can give this guy a ton of issues, and we're going to get questions answered, assuming Battle doesn't die, within a couple minutes. What this kid's defensive grappling is like, how he handles effective pressure, how he handles power shots, how he weathers adversity. We don't have answers to any of those questions, and the guy's minus 160 in the fight. Like it's one of those spots that I don't understand how you line that guy that way.
Yeah, and to your point, I think you touched on an interesting thing. Like I've seen the same thing with the first round battle, or first round will go to Gore, but it's like I don't, like you said, I expect Battle to be outworking him most of the fight, to be honest. And like if Battle does get on top of him, that could be the round of the fight, Like I don't think it's something where Battle needs Gore to like gas out to win this fight. I think Battle could 30-27 him if they're fresh, personally.
Yeah. It's in play. So, there's just so many questions on Gore. Once again, it's a play based on the numbers too.
He's minus 170 with 3 pro fights. Like that's crazy. I don't
zero adversity.
None, and he hasn't. And again, like I said, he hasn't like blown guys out regionally either. It's. I don't think people understand how much experience matters in MMA. And this dude has 3 fights and is coming in here against a guy who's got like 20 fights across amateur and professional in Battle, and he's minus 170. I don't get it.
Well, I should say last point, his first pro fight, obviously it was like a quasi second ago. It wasn't like that one. I think it was like 2018, right?
For who? Gore or Battle?
Gore.
No, Gore. Oh, his first pro fight. Yeah, it was 2018. His first Abby fight was like 2014.
Yeah, but it was like when the guy he was fighting like actually just decided to like do things and go forward.
Yeah.
He hit him consistently and forced a split as a result. When he decided to stand on the outside, get pot shotted, which we've seen pretty much from every past opponent since, you could say, okay, the guy's made evolutions and that's great, but we just don't know at all. Zero evidence for that. The guy hit him, and he's having success. So it's like, to me, these are spots to capitalize on in MMA. Could be wrong. We could look like dipshits.
Yeah,
and Battle dies in the first round, and we look stupid. But it's like you're laying. There's a line on a guy at chalk who hasn't proved shit.
Or if Gore just turns out to be legit, which he could. But like I'm with you, Luke. We haven't really seen a lot to show that Gore is like the real deal. And again, I'm not saying he's a fraud, but all he is a guy who's looked okay regionally and looked okay on tough. Yeah, you're right. These are the spots to capitalize on. This is recency bias. This is the mark. This is where there is an edge in the market. I feel like we make this bet 10 times, we're going to make money long term on it. So
yep,
we'll see. But moving on, I'm going to throw it to you here, Luke. We got an electric one here. We got smiling Sam Alvey. He's taking on Brendan Allen. What are your thoughts?
It's so weird for me because I think he looked great in the Puna fight. Like, I thought his striking looked better than it probably ever had. He took some absolute bombs from Puna in that fight and just essentially laughed them off. And then he goes out there, even pre-KO against Chris Curtis, his striking looked like shit. Like, I don't know what happened in that time frame. And then he eventually got KO'd by Curtis. So it's like, all right, short notice, Alvey. Like I said, those last 2 fights is like, it was like a tale of 2 different people in watching both of those fights. It was like 2 different guys. I know and I guess I should say in my perspective, I've never been the biggest. I know you're really not a big talent guy, but I've been vocal about, I don't like Sam Alvey's game in 2022. It just does. It's not conducive to winning minutes. It's not conducive to winning fights. He's going to plant his foot behind the black line more often than not. There have been points in recent fights where he's decided to bite the mouthpiece, go forward. In those scenarios, he's actually forced some close fights to his credit. But in the aggregate, that's just kind of the game he's willing to play. He's obviously not going to wrestle. He's not like a ridiculous power threat in terms of recent years. And then the guy's shocked when he's losing close fights. Is like, well, you do it to yourself, you dummy. If I'm being honest, like, you just got to be more aggressive and throw more. So it's like, I think Allen being a sizable favorite makes sense. Am I trying to lay minus 400 on it? No, I think his activities more proven. Could Alvey knock him out? Sure. But it's like, comes down to optics. Alvey just has not looked great. I don't think he's won a fight in the last 4 to 5 years. It's just really hard to back invest And a guy like Alvey, once again, am I trying to invest in Allen at 400 on short notice too? No, but at the same time, I'm not overtly concerned with the Allen gas tank because Alvey just doesn't push much pace historically either. So it should be a decent fill-in spot for Allen, but I'd just say, stay off it.
Yeah, I'm largely with you. It's funny because like we were chatting in the group text today, obviously, and somebody was like, "Oh, are you going to bet Alvey, John?" And I was like, honestly, I think it's a better fight for him than Phil Hawes was, and I do to a degree because like I felt even with Phil Hawes's fragility, like Hawes
better
is
wrestler than Allen.
He's a much better wrestler, and he could probably press him in the clinch and just hold him there if he needed to. And Alvey would accept it, And I don't think Alvey would be turning Hawes in the clinch like he has some guys. And so I was like, yeah, I mean, this line certainly shouldn't be a lot wider than the Hawes line. I probably will play Alvey. And then Sean was like, dude, Alvey got outstruck by Wellington Tournament. It's like, all right, well, I'll tape it tonight. And I taped it. It's like, fuck, man. Like, I said it after his last loss, and I almost went back on it. But it's like I said after his last loss, I'm never betting Alvey again. And it's like you watch the Turman fight, and it's like there's no – I can't make an argument that Turman is a better striker than Brendan Allen. There's no planet that I can make that argument on. And you touched on the Allen thing where it was like a tale of two fights with Puna. But even against Curtis, like Curtis at least is a proactive striker who's working the body, and going into the pocket. And like, we haven't really seen Allen get one-shotted. Both the Strickland fight and the fight with Curtis was kind of an accumulation of damage. And we know Alvey's not really going to do that. He's going to try to pick his shots. And to your point, he's not even really hurting guys anymore. He like briefly hurt Span a couple fights ago, but like no one's really getting hurt bad by him anymore. And so it's just like, I don't know. Like what the path to victory for him, I guess, is maybe his left hand scares Allen into a staring contest, like the Jung fight, where he just maybe gets off a little more, maybe he knocks him out. But I can't imagine a scenario where he wins minutes here consistently. If anyone's going to have grappling success, it'll probably be Allen. I don't expect him to have much. Yeah, I mean, the line's probably more or less right. Like, I don't really see, maybe you could say there's slight value on Alvey, but I don't know. I'm at the point with Sam where it's like, I've loved losing money on him. He seems like a nice guy. I like Sam Alvey, but like I'm done betting and losing more money on him. I'm gonna pass the fight. I hope he knocks out Brendan Allen. Honestly, I hope I'm regretting not betting him, but I don't think it's gonna happen. I think Allen's gonna cruise pretty easily. Moving on though, we got Shavkat Rakhmonov, 14-0. He's taking on Carlston Harris. A lot of people think highly about both of these guys. I don't tend to think highly about either of them, to be completely honest. It's just like I'm not saying either of them are bad, but like I'm seeing people be like, oh, these are both top 10 prospects. These guys could both be in the top 10. I'm just like, really? Like, is that? Are we really saying that? Like, I just don't see it. I think they both have some really fundamental issues they need to clean up. But I do think of the two, Rakhmonov being much younger, Carlston Harris obviously 33, has more of a chance to clean them up. And to be honest, I think what Rakhmonov does really well, in particular how fast his hands are, just some of the, he has some developed skills that I think will translate the higher he goes. He just has to fill in the gaps. The real issue with Rakhmonov is, well, the guy keeps pulling guillotines. I think he looks pretty bad when he's gotten put on his back, to be honest. He gives up double unders really easily in the clinch. And look, when guys have pressed forward on him, he's there to be hit. He keeps his chin in the air and he doesn't move his head much. He does kind of like, the James Vick, I'm going to use my big frame to just kind of keep distance here. And mostly it's been fine with it. But that's also because you look at the two guys he's fought in the UFC, and it's Alex Oliveira, who just dove into the clinch, got double unders immediately, and promptly got guillotined. That was fun. And then Michel Prazeres, who's a 155er who was just overweight and decided to fight at 170. He gave up 9 inches of height and 10 inches of reach? Something crazy. It looked like a child.
That was some pride shit right there.
Dude, it looked like he was fighting a child. Like, that is it. Not only was he that much bigger, it was Prazeres' last fight before he retired at 37 years of age, off a 3-year hiatus. So it's like he didn't really have to use those skills at all. And look, so like I said, I think there's some big holes in Shavkat's game, but I think he's young enough that he can reasonably clean them up. On the other side, there's Harris, who's 33, and I think what Harris does isn't bad. You know, when he can get in on the body lock, he's very good at landing takedowns from there. He's obviously got a pretty nice choke series. His striking is wonky as fuck, but it seems to be effective. You know, his right hand is the weirdest thing I've ever seen, but it seems to hit really hard. And he's also very hittable, similar to Shavkat. I just kind of feel with Harris, like the guy's a wrestler and submission grappler, but he doesn't go for lower body takedowns. Everything he looks for is in the body lock, and he's going to hit a point in the UFC where, and you even saw it in his first fight with Aguilera to an extent, where guys that are just good at public for underhooks are just going to get them and turn him pretty easily and not get taken down. And when that happens, all he's really going to have is his power. You know, he's not a very skilled striker, but he's a big hitter and he's a good athlete. That's what he's got going for him. I just think his wrestling eventually is going to run out of real estate as he goes further up. So I think Shavkat's less capped than Harris is. But what I will say is in this fight, I think there are significant stylistic advantages for Harris in some areas that can cause problems. I think the line should be about evens. But in particular, I kind of think, you know, I touched on Shavkat tends to give up double unders in the clinch fairly easily. And that is really where Harris wants to be. He's going to bomb into the clinch pretty much right away. His entire game is kind of based out of working from the body lock. I've seen people say, oh, you know, Prazeres and Oliveira couldn't get much done there. It's like neither of those guys have the kind of physicality or strength Harris does from that position. And so, like, I do think Harris is going to be able to get there fairly routinely, maybe land takedowns from there, but even if not, be able to have pretty significant success there. At range, I think it's kind of interesting. You know, I think Shavkat's faster. I think he's a lot more technical, but we know Harris is willing to go forward and just go very aggressive. And if Harris closes the distance, like I said, Shavkat's there to get hit, man, and he's there to get hurt. I kind of think that's Harris knocking him out's a live outcome. I think Shavkat knocking out Harris is a pretty live outcome. I wouldn't say the striking's even. I'd favor Shavkat, you know, technically, but like it's a weird thing because Shavkat's bigger than everybody he fights with a longer reach, and Harris is the same size as him. And it's like, and granted, Harris has that coming back at him too. It's like size parity for the first time, which, you know, for a guy like Shavkat who needs to fight off his back foot, or not off his back foot, but like who needs to use his length, you know, to stay effective defensively, that could cause some issues. And on the other side, I actually think Shavkat can have a lot of success here too if he gets on top of Harris. From what we've seen of Harris on bottom, he's looked pretty bad. So I do think if either guy gets on top, they are going to do pretty well there. At range, I favor Shavkat slightly, but I also think Harris has a lot of ability to knock him out there. And I do think, you know, Shavkat has some tendencies that are going to let Harris get off on exactly what he wants to do. So while I think Shavkat has a higher upside here, I think this line is kind of crazy. I have a bet on Carlson Harris. I think it's a very close fight. What do you think, Lee?
It's interesting because I've been like a huge Harris proponent. I've actually bet him in both of his UFC fights so far. I bet Shavkat and laid the juice on him over homeboy in his last fight as well. So yeah, it's been interesting. I've kind of been with you that I've been lower, you know, on Shavkat than probably most people, and have been higher on Harris than most. But I kind of think there's also some Jason Witt, Phil Rowe dynamic here that I think that Harris can probably be looking a bit decent, but he's going to die. I feel really good about saying it. I think this guy is going to die in the fight. I think his general coming in, striking in reckless based nature, he overextends. I had a bet on him, obviously, over Impa, and I was sweating my ass off when he was throwing all of those shots. Like, his looseness of how he comes into the pocket is terrible, and I think
it is
that Shavkat's timing, he just has that sniper-like nature. I think he's going to be the guy to just really make this dude pay. I think he flatlines Harris bad in this fight, but it depends on when it comes, in my opinion, because to your point, I think there is some grinding based consideration for Harris because, you know, we've seen the dude. There you go. I'm never gonna live that one down. That was
epic, to be honest.
People are gonna clip that. Guys don't clip that. Be nice.
I've been lower on Shavkat.
But to your point, though, even going back to his like M1 regional days, you know, he has been taken down. He has been grinded a bit. So I do think there is some merit to that. Even when he fought the dude, the Isgak Maiev guy, I think he's like out of Khabib's camp or whatever. He had some success there and actually ended up submitting the dude with Bravo too. So I get it. I would much rather take the Harris money line, gun to my head, but I think actually the bets for the fight are more so on Rakhmonov inside the distance. Rakhmonov KO. I really think he's the guy to put him out. I think Harris bets are trapped by the number spots.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right. I will say Shavkat's boxing I was a bit more impressed with than I'd recall being. He is very fast and he does, set his shots up quite well. It kind of sucks because like I'm having no buyer's regret on Harris here. I just think the number is off. But I really wish we had gotten the Ameev fight because I kind of feel like if he fought Ameev now, Shavkat would be a pretty big favorite. And I just know Ameev does such a good job at staying safe and working inside. I just would trust him a lot more to implement the game plan he needed to. You know what I mean?
Ameev and
Shavkat.
Yeah. Because yeah.
And Ameev stays very safe on top,
Yeah, Russian coast type. Yeah.
Yeah. Who doesn't get hit at distance and just plays high guard and works and slowly works his way in.
Yeah.
I could see it. I could 100% see it. Like I said, I don't. Aguilera, I think hurt Harris, if I'm not mistaken.
He did uppercut. Yeah. He dinged him in the first.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be shocked by it. Actually, does it go here? Is that a decent line?
It's like 200, I think.
Oh wow! Holy shit! It's out to like 240. Fuck. Wow. Dude, FanDuel at 350. What the fuck? How can you be that wide from the market? $1 wide of the market there? Like.
Sometimes it works for us, sometimes it doesn't, right?
If you like goes the distance, it works, right? But anyway, moving on. We got a fun one here. Do you have strong thoughts here? Punahele Soriano, Nick Maximov?
Man, this is, I think, another one of the fights on the card where it just depends on what happens, which sounds stupid as shit, but it's like Soriano, 7 of his 8 pro wins, KO first round. He's easily the biggest power puncher that Maximov's faced by a mile, the best striker he's fought by a mile. I think Maximov is incredibly green as a striker at this point in his career. And if he does not turn out to be one of those zombie BJJ guys, Puna is going to put him in a grave reasonably soon. In this fight, I feel pretty decent about saying that. But if he's not, and he can turn out to just like inherent some of that Diaz brothers, fucking weed PCP type shit zombie scenario or whatever, where he can just take shots. We've seen Puna slow, in multiple fights. We saw him get beat over the course of 15 by Allen, even when he fought homeboy Pickett. The reason why he went to the wrestling in that fight was because he was exhausted and he knew that he could exploit at least a weakness. So I thought that showed good fight IQ from his component there. But he went to the wrestling because he was exhausted and he knew he really couldn't throw much more after that. So what we have seen from Puna extended is just not pretty. And so that's where the merit to Maximov is, in my opinion, because Puna's only faced one takedown attempt in the UFC. It came from Brendan Allen. I thought he showed a good sprawl in the one takedown, but nonetheless, he's only faced one TDA, and we've never seen Puna on his back. And I know me and John will slightly disagree about this. I'm a bit higher on Maximov than John is. I think the guy's a really good submission grappler, and if he's fighting a guy in Puna who is now exhausted, and I know Puna, former collegiate wrestler, once again hasn't faced a lot of TDAs, stayed upright, but if he's exhausted on his back against a guy like Maximov, I think Maximov subs him pretty easily, to be honest. It's just we don't know. Can he get him down? Can he get him down early? If it's later, can he survive the shots? We don't know. So that's kind of where the quasi question comes in here. So I think it's, probably not a hot take, but I think it's, kind of Puna early. The later this fight goes, that means Maximov's, not dead. He's probably doing something right. And he might be able to take over this fight later. So I think from actually a money line perspective, I think the value's on Maximov.
Yeah, I think I agree pretty much 100% with that. Yeah, I'm not as high on Maximov as you, but what I will say is, Brundage is a pretty big, strong guye,
Good
for this
wrestler.
division. And Brundage, I think, has fought at 205, if I'm not mistaken, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think.
Uh,
Yeah.
and like he did a pretty good job, control. He does a lot of advanced stuff when he can get on top of you. The question being, what's Poon? Like you said, I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. What's Poon's bottom game like? What's his takedown defense really like? I don't really know, but I do think there's this idea being propagated that like early on it's going to be one-way traffic, but it's like you talked about it earlier, with Brendan Allen. It's like Brendan Allen looked like a new man against Punahele Soriano. The only time Puna has really looked like very good on the feet was the Todorovic fight, who we now know if you can close distance fast, you can hit Dusko pretty easily. And Soriano, obviously, his greatest attribute is he's very fast and he closes distance extremely quickly. I'm not saying that he won't be able to do that against Maximov, not necessarily, but I do think Maximov, he does a very good. I don't want to compare him exactly to Ryan Palmer at all or Lance Palmer, but he does do a very good job of like staying safe, if you get what I mean. Like he's not going to go bite down and be very open. He's going to keep a relatively high guard and keep his head tucked very tight, when he's trying to close distance, which I think could cause him some issues at some point. But I do think Puna's tendency, like if Puna was a guy who was going to fire big leg kicks and work the body, I'd be a bit more bullish on him in this spot. But he's really a headhunter, which you even saw it with Allen a bit. He clipped Allen a couple times, but as soon as Allen realized he could just hold a high guard up there and Puna really wasn't going to land anything, Puna never really adjusted his game. And I kind of think that could happen here. Which you touched on the entire Punahele Soriano gas tank issue where it's possible Puna just gets tired and then now all of a sudden he's got a better grappler on top of him. And I am fairly convinced that Maximov is a better grappler than Soriano, to be honest.
He is
maybe not
100%.
Yeah, maybe not a better wrestler, but I do think if Maximov gets on top of him, it's going to be pretty bad news in all likelihood. I don't know many decorated black belts coming out of the Hawaiian scene, but I'm just saying, I know he's been training with Francis Ngannou now, so maybe he's got like his third degree black belt, but who knows?
That Cameroon black belt, I tell you what. Fuck you, John Danaher. Cameroon.
I have this feeling, and I'm not going to bet it because it's like, if it turns out you're wrong, and like Puna has done a pretty good job when guys have tried to clinch him and disengaging quickly. Yeah. If it turns out you're wrong, it's going to look like Puna is a huge favorite, which is why I don't really want to play Maximov plus 170. But I do have this suspicion that like Maximov is going to get inside on him and work him. I just like, I can't shake it. I just keep thinking, people continue to overrate Soriano because he has a couple KOs and just not look at the facts that like, even if you were to go back to his contenders fight when he fought Jamie Pickett, Pickett was starting to have success at range and Soriano just like, okay, I'm going to finally go to my wrestling. I don't think there's much chance he does that here, like at all. I'd be shocked if he does. And I can't get past this feeling that like, if Soriano doesn't get him out of there quickly, Maximov was able to out-grapple Brundage, who's bigger than Soriano is and probably stronger. Like, let's not forget, Cody Brundage out-muscled William Knight, who I'm pretty confidently his only attribute of strength. I just have this feeling Maximov is going to close distance and get on him and wear him down and break him here. I could be wrong. That's why I'm not betting it, because I do think the unknowns just kind of outweigh any edge you might have. But I have a guy with a very good gas tank who's going to push the kind of pace that is exhausting for anybody, fighting a guy who is very gassy and who's really only at his most dangerous for about 3 minutes. That doesn't really add up to me, especially since the guy pushing the pace is the better grappler. I think the value's on Maximov. I think, did you just touch on your breakdown that I think the sub line is pretty interesting, to be honest?
Maximov sub plus 350. It's like, yes, you're playing into a lot of bullshit, but it's like, okay, if in comparison to taking like a money line shot, you could be burying yourself, but it's like, I think we can all agree that, if Maximov is to win this fight, he's obviously alive after round one. Puna gasses. He's the better grappler. If he's able to get into these positions, I think plus 350 on his subline is a great poke. I feel very confident to say that he's the better grappler. Can he get Puna down? Because obviously Puna comes from a wrestling background, but it's like if he's exhausted and you have a guy like Maximov on top of you when you're exhausted, I feel good about saying that Maximov is going to sub him, to be honest.
Yeah, honestly, I don't even think it's a case of like Maximov has to survive round one. I heard Liam mention it, and he's 100% right. I hadn't even considered it really, which is dumb on my part. But like, Puna does have a tendency to lunge in with lead hooks and overextend a bit, and Maximov has made pretty much his bread and butter off of timing, guys overextending and grabbing the single leg there, which is going to be right in front of him if Puna's coming at him with his normal style of fighting. I'm not saying he's going to hit it. Again, like you touched on, Puna looks like he has a good sprawl. I think he's got pretty strong hips. He looks like he does a good job pummeling for underhooks. But, like, what if he just gets taken down a minute into the fight? Is it a lock? He's going to get up? I don't think so.
Well, once again, that's why the fight's just a shit show because there's so many questions playing into it. So that's what I'm saying. If I was to play it, give me plus 350 Maximov sub on a plausible potential outcome. I'm playing into the variance. I know I'm playing into the variance. I can make an argument for it at a big number. So if I was to play it gun to my head, Maximov sub plus 350, that's what I'd go.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Today, I'm excited to see it, though. It should be an interesting fight. But moving on, we got the main event. Jack Hermansson, the Joker. He's back, taking on, I think, the darling of MMA Twitter these days, Sean Strickland. He has become quite the entertainer. Everybody enjoys him, and I'm probably fanning him this week. I'll be honest. It's not my most passionate take I've ever had. I do see the argument for why Strickland should be up around minus 200. Look, he's the better boxer by a mile here. I like Strickland a lot, and I think he has a style that's going to win a lot of fights in the UFC, to be completely honest. It's a lot of volume. He seems to be very durable, and he has good cardio. My question with Strickland are a couple things. First of all, the fact that he is so boxing heavy, how's he going to deal with a proactive leg kicker? We don't really know the answer to that. He's fighting that here in Hermansson. He also, he leans on his durability a lot more than I would like him to. Now, I don't expect Jack is going to, hurt him on the feet. I'd be a little surprised at that. But the other thing is, I think Strickland's grappling is a pretty massive question mark. Not that I'd be surprised if he was a bad grappler. And I did bet him against Brendan Allen. But, with the Brendan Allen fight, I felt pretty comfortable that a guy that's positionally unsound as Brendan Allen was probably not going to be likely to get him down. Or control him on the mat. Whereas on the other side, Strickland or Hermansson, we haven't seen it in a few fights because of the level he's really been fighting and the guys he's been fighting. When Hermansson gets on top of you, he's probably got one of the better top games in the sport. Certainly some of the better ground and pound in the sport. He is extremely positionally sound. The biggest problem I've had with Hermansson is that he's just, against guys at the upper echelon, I just don't think he's got the physicality. But, with Strickland's case, Strickland's a guy who came up from welterweight. Look, I think he's grown into the weight class fairly well. I would expect him to win the stand-up here. But I don't think he provides, the last fight that Hermansson was in, Marvin Vettori, we saw Hermansson just basically had no chance to grapple Vettori there. He tried. Vettori was just the stronger guy who was also the better grappler. And so with that being the case, he just was kind of fucked there. I don't think he's in that dynamic here. And I have this suspicion with Strickland, and I could be wrong, but my gut is Strickland stands very, very tall, with that boxing base. I have this suspicion that it's going to be pretty easy to get in on his hips and get him down, if you can time it right. And Hermansson does tend to have, fairly strong timing. That's about all. I don't think he's the best wrestler. Like I said, I think he has physicality issues. But I do think he's going to be able to get Strickland down a few times here. And look, again, the data's kind of old, but it's I've seen Strickland held down before. I kind of think Jack can hold him down. Maybe Sean's improved that, but we don't know that. And so with that being the case, it's just I favor Strickland, but even standing, yeah, I give Strickland a decent edge there. But we saw Hermansson, look, he lost the fight to Vettori solidly, but he was competitive, and I personally would rate on balance Vettori's striking game better than or more diverse than Strickland's is. And Vettori obviously was able to neutralize Hermansson's biggest weapon. Yeah, so I think he can be competitive-ish. He'll at least be high volume on the feet with Strickland here. I trust the level of competition he's fought a bit better. Look, I like Strickland, but the reality is since he came back, he beat Jack Marshman. he beat Jocko, who's a good fighter and probably his best win. But Jocko, if we're being honest, is kind of fucked unless if he's fighting somebody who's going to put a pace out against him. Um, he beat Uriah Hall. It's kind of the same thing. If Hall can't knock you out, I mean, Uriah Hall lost 10 minutes to Bevon Lewis. I like Strickland. I think he could more than end up paying off this line. I don't know. I can't get it out of my head. I kind of think Hermansson's going to get takedowns, get a few takedowns here and hold him down. And I also think he's going to be able to keep it a lot closer than meets the eye on the feet, especially if he stays as proactive with leg kicks as he's been in the past. With that said, I favor Strickland in the fight, but I have Strickland closer to like 55%, like minus 125, minus 130 range. So I'm going to take the shot at Hermansson up near plus 190. Like I said, it's not the most confident pick ever. It's probably only going to be a half unit or a unit for me. But I do think he has paths here that are kind of just being discounted because people like Strickland. What are your thoughts on it, Luke?
So I can't recall which fight it was. I think it might have been the Cannonier fight for Hermansson. But I think it was like Dom Cruz was talking about like that. I don't think that Hermansson is anything special as a wrestler. I think he kind of has to hustle his way into these positions and do these type of things. In where I somewhat agree with you, I do think he's going to get takedowns in this fight, but I don't think personally he's going to be able to hold Strickland down or finish him. And I think that's the primary win equity for him early is I think he's going to have to hustle into those positions. He's going to have to get into those dominant positions. And I don't, really disagree in the sense that I think Hermansson has an excellent top game. It's very good. I mean, when he's been able to get on top of guys, it's been very difficult to get out of. But I do think Strickland actually does have the game to get out of those positions. And I think he's going to get put in some tricky ones early here, but I do think Strickland has the game to get out of those positions personally. And I think he's just going to go ahead and box up Jack. I think the technical acumen between the two is just different. You know, Jack will throw a lot of strikes, but I think he's just generally rickety. I don't think there's a lot of process to his stand-up. Even when Strickland gets hit, I think he rolls with shots well. I think he defends distance strikes at about 66%, which is insane. He can keep that work rate over the course of 15 minutes. And despite Jack throwing a lot, I just don't think there's a lot of substance there. So I'm not saying, you know, Strickland is a lock. Would I play Strickland? No, honestly, I think Strickland around that 66-70% mark is about right. Personally, I just think Jack's probably limited to an early finish. But once again, it is a live outcome in the sense that we have not seen Strickland aggressively wrestle a ton since, you know, the Usman fight, since the Alex Garcia fight. So I do think there's some merit there, but I personally would be really, really shocked if he was out there or was able to go out there and outbox a guy like Sean Strickland personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. What do you think of what Ilmac asked? Do you think, what do you think of the over? I think the over's 4.5, I believe.
I do think it goes the distance personally.
I do too. Although I will say I do think there is. It's kind of weird because like I kind of thought the Cannonier fight with Hermansson, like when it happened, I kind of felt like he just wanted out after he realized he couldn't hold Cannonier down. But then like the Vettori fight, you know, the last 2 rounds of that fight, Vettori was kicking the shit out of him, and he just kept coming. So I don't know. You know, maybe
a tough guy. He's a tough guy.
He is, but.
Cannonier hit him with that fucking massive uppercut, dude. That would have killed anybody. Like, that would have killed anybody.
We're gonna have a fun little breakdown on Cannonier next week. I
don't even know what your thoughts are on that fight. It should be fun.
I don't know what my thoughts are on that fight. I taped it already.
I did. I just taped it this afternoon too. So.
Yeah, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I like Hermansson here. Like I said, it's not. I would say my most passionate take of the entire card is probably Barriault and Battle, to be honest. I don't know how you feel, but that's
Davis. I love Alexis Davis.
All right. Well, there we go. So yeah, guys. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. We'll be back next week. It's just gonna be Lags has his father coming to town, so he's not gonna be on. But we will be joined by the one and only Mike's MMA Picks. It's going to be a fun show. We're going to have a good time. So, guys, stop by next week, same time, 10 p.m. Eastern. As usual, we got Luke at SWR_betting and myself, John, at MMA Fox. Good luck this weekend, everybody, and have a great night.